Soldier's Heart by Alex 51324. Chapter 9. November to December 1915. 20th of November 1915. Dear Thomas, I hope you're well, and that this letter catches up to you wherever you are. Lady Mary heard from Mr. Matthew that he ran into you at the front again. She said it sounded as though you were working there now, doing first aid for the men in the trenches or something like that. Since the last of any of us heard, apart from field postcards, was that you were in charge of several wards at your hospital. We are all wondering what happened. I'm sure that what you're doing at the front is also an important and responsible job, but I wonder if it's dangerous. Everything here is much the same. William has signed up for the Derby scheme, but promised his father that he won't go to the war until his group is called. Some men came from the scheme to talk to Mr. Bates as well, but once he showed them his discharge papers from when he was in the army before, they said that he didn't need to do anything further. He offered to assist with the canvassing, but they haven't gotten back to him. His lordship is doing something to do with recruiting, but I'm not sure what it is. Lady Mary says that he is dissatisfied with it because it mostly involves going to meetings. The hospital benefit concert has finally been scheduled for the Sunday before Christmas. Lady Mary will play the piano, and Lady Edith plans to sing. Lady Sybil would like to do a recitation, but she and her ladyship have not been able to agree on a piece yet. Apparently everything Lady Sybil has proposed so far is a little advanced for a village audience. We are working on a Christmas parcel for you, and will send it soon. Please tell me if there is anything in particular you'd like. Love, Anna Smith. Thomas had tried several times to write a reply, both while he was still at the aid post and now that he was back, but had never gotten much further than, Dear Anna. This time he had managed. 29th of November, 1915. Dear Anna, I'm fine, and I'm back at the dressing station. I was only up at the front for a few weeks. One of the doctors here was getting some experience working at a regimental aid post, and they sent me and some others up with him. While he was thinking about what to say next, a large drop of water splatted onto the paper. With a growl of frustration, he pulled his waterproof ground sheet more firmly over his head. He was on linen duty again, and, craving solitude, had come back to the billet before dinner. It was clearly a mistake. Now the barn was not only wet, but freezing cold. They'd been issued a small wood stove, but they weren't given enough fuel to light it when he was the only one there, and in any case the scant heat it produced went straight out the roof. He lit a cigarette, warming his fingers over the flame of the lighter. Well, this was bollocks. There really wasn't anything for it but to go back to the station. At least he could warm up there. He thought about throwing away the letter, but it was the farthest he'd gotten yet, so he folded it up and put it and his pen and ink into his pockets. Maybe the others would leave him alone if he was absorbed in writing a letter. It wasn't likely, but stranger things had happened. When he got to the orderly's room, he found it more than usually crowded. Everyone else who had a bit of a break was already there. He squeezed into a spot at a table with some of the others from the billet. "All right," said Rollins. "If Barrow can't stick at the barn, is officially unfit for human life." "Unfit for any life," Thomas said. "I saw the mice packing their bags." "I mean it," Rollins said. "We've got to do something." "Like what?" asked Thomas. "Start a mutiny?" "We'll call that Plan B," said Rollins. "What's Plan A?" asked Plank. "What we have to do," Rollins said, "is make an official complaint. We say that we understand the billeting situation is difficult, but we've been very patient, and with winter coming on, the bloody barn is injurious to our health, and we're not going to take it lying down anymore." Thomas scoffed. "You do that. It wouldn't accomplish anything." "Me?" said Rollins. No, you're going to do it." "Why me?" "Because you're the bloody Lance Corporal." He was, wasn't he? "I'm not saying the part about not taking it lying down," he said. "That could be considered mutinous." Fine, Rollins conceded. "You can just say we're fed up. And who am I saying this to?" Rollins looked around the table. Nobody else knew either. "The wardmaster?" "No," said Thomas. "All right, what about the M.O. who likes you?" Rollins suggested. "What's he going to do about it?" Thomas asked. "I don't know, he's an officer." Thomas sighed. "Alas, Corporal Jessup. He'll probably have some idea." "There you go," said Rollins. "I knew you'd know what to do." "I'm not promising anything," Thomas warned them. What he learned from Jessup when he found him in the NCO's room the next day was not encouraging. "An official complaint? Well, then it's the bulletin sergeant you want." "Who's he?" Thomas hadn't known they had one. It turned out that they didn't have one exactly. They shared him with the transport corps, and his office was in one of their buildings. "But I wouldn't expect to get much joy of him," Corporal Jessup added. "Nobody's happy with his billet." "I know," Thomas said with a sigh. "Ours is pretty bad, though." "You'll not have that barn out Petticoat Lane, don't you?" Jessup asked. "It looks sturdier than some." "It's the roof that's the problem. It leaks like a sieve." "Can't you just bunch up in the dry part?" "There aren't any. We could just about stand it in the summer, but we're all going to get pneumonia before we go on much longer." "Well, that did solve the problem. We could put you all in the sick ward." Thomas hoped it wouldn't come to that. "I did have one idea. If we could get our hands on a belt tent, we could put that in the barn. Then we'd have the walls to block the wind and the canvas to keep the rain off." Corporal Jessup scratched his chin. "Let's go and have a word with the supply sergeant. He's one of our own. We might have more luck with him." So they went to the supply sergeant. He was shaking his head before Corporal Jessup was halfway through explaining what they wanted. "The only tents we have are the big marquees we use for extra wards. I can't give you one of those, and in any case it's too big for what you have in mind. I should see the bulletin sergeant if I were you." "Do you have any ideas about how to put him in a helpful frame of mind?" Jessup asked. "Not unless you've got a sweet Polly Oliver in your section," the sergeant said. "And you'd have to have pretty loose morals to boot." "I'm fairly sure we'd have noticed by now if one of us was actually female," Thomas said. He considered making a joke about putting Rollins in a dress, but rejected the notion and very firmly did not think about how he'd ever known anyone who'd have leapt at the opportunity. "What about an estimate go?" "They could pool their money." The sergeant shook his head. "He knows them all." Jessup sighed. "It looks like your only choice is to appeal to a sense of duty, lad." "When that doesn't work," said the sergeant, "I might be able to do you a few extra ground sheets." "Thanks," Thomas said. That wouldn't be much help, but he supposed it was better than nothing. After signing for the linen delivery, Thomas went into the orderly's room, got a cup of tea, and tried to work on the letter to Anna some more. He wrote, "It wasn't so bad at the fronts. We got decent quarters on account of even the general staff realize it's a good idea if we're a bit less filthy than everyone else when we go sticking our fingers in wounds. They don't want the fighting men making themselves too at home, so they aren't really encouraged to improve their dugouts much." Rouse had explained that to him. The idea was that trenches were purely temporary fortifications, and making them comfortable would only make the men less eager to move the line forward. An aid post, on the other hand, might become a dressing station or even a casualty clearing station as the front moved further away. It made a sort of sense, right up until the moment you considered the fact that the lines had barely moved since this time last year. He wrote on, "Now I'm back at the 47th and doing linen again. It's quiet work in the indoors, which is welcome because the weather's gone cold and wet, and our barn is no better." Rollins dropped into the seat across from him. "Writing to your girl again? Thought maybe you'd called it off." Thomas glanced up at him. "She's not my girl," he reminded him. "Right," said Rollins. "Your friend who is a girl. What do you find to say to a girl that isn't your girl?" "Not much," said Thomas. "That's why I haven't written to her in a while." Rollins lit a cigarette. "So what did old Jessup say?" "He said we need to talk to the bulletin sergeant. He's over in the transport corps. But he doesn't think it'll do any good either." "It's got to," said Rollins. "We have the worst billet in the entire sector." "I bet lots of people think that," Thomas pointed out. "Yeah, but someone's got to be right." He had a point there. "It really is crap. I didn't want to come back from the front." "What about the shelling?" "You learn to sleep through it." A few times Thomas had woken up to find his blanket covered with a layer of dirt that had sifted down from the ceiling after a particularly nearby strike. But it was a lot easier to shake the dirt off a blanket than it was to dry one out. Rollins shrugged. "Should I go with you when you talk to the building sergeant, you think? Might help to show that we're speaking for the whole section." Thomas didn't particularly want to do it on his own. In fact, he'd considered asking Corporal Jessup to go with him before deciding it would make him look weak. Couldn't hurt. When should he go? I can't today, I'm on standby. The chances of a convoy coming in were virtually nil, but it would be just his luck if they got one the one time he's skipped off. Tomorrow, I suppose. All right. After lunch? Everybody's in a better mood after lunch. It's a fact of human nature. Thomas wasn't so sure about that, but he didn't have any better ideas, so he agreed. The next afternoon, they set out for the transport corps area. Rawlins had a number of additional suggestions about what they ought to say, leaning heavily on the theme that they were fed up, and also that they were British subjects wearing His Majesty's uniform and entitled to decent living conditions. After he'd run his mouth off for a while, Thomas sighed and said, "Let me do the talking, all right?" Rawlins agreed, but that didn't last long. As Thomas explained the problem, the billeting sergeant leaned over his counter with a bored expression.
"So you don't fancy your billet?"
he said when Thomas finished. "No, Sergeant."
"That's a brand new one on me," he called over his soldier. "Bill, we've got a couple of our AMC lads here who don't like the billet." "Oh, dearie me,"
said Bill, a large man with corporal stripes.
"We can't have that, can we?" "Tell you what," said the sergeant. "Why don't I ring up the Ritz and book you half a dozen rooms? You'll have to double up, but there is a war on."
This was pretty much what Thomas had expected, and he was getting ready to say ta, but that might make it difficult to get to their shifts on time, when Rawlins interrupted. "We're serious! Conditions in our billet are injurious to our health, and we want to make an official complaint."
"Oh," said Bill, "an official complaint. That's different."
Thomas gave Rawlins a quelling look. "Yes, sir, yes. Is there a form for that?" He didn't think that would do any good either, but it might shut Rawlins up.
"Of course."
The sergeant reached under his counter and brought out a roll of bog paper.
"There you be. Official complaint form number 2, best used with tablet number 9.
Rawlins opened his mouth, and Thomas trod heavily on his foot. "Could we get one of those for every man in the billet?" It didn't seem likely that the sergeant would be that committed to the joke, but if he was, they'd at least have something to show for their trouble.
"Just pass it round," said Bill, guffawing. "You can all sign your names."
"It's not funny," said Rawlins. "We're asking you to do—" Thomas spoke over him before he could actually say, "Do your bloody job." "What my mate means is we understand that it's no easy job finding places to put everyone, and every billet's got something wrong with it. We're not complaining about the mice, or the smell, or that we're sleeping on flagstones hotter than a landlord's heart, are we?" Was it his imagination, or was the billeting sergeant looking at him with ever so slightly less contempt? "And in the warm months, we could just about stand having it rain indoors. But now winter's setting in." He wasn't exactly sure how he wanted to end that sentence, and Rawlins filled in the gap with, "It's unfit for human life is what it is. I doubt you could put horses in there without hearing from the RSPCA." With that, any goodwill that Thomas might have managed to accumulate was washed away.
"Private," said the billeting sergeant, finally serious. "There are men at the front who'll be bloody grateful to live in that barn. Unless you'd like to trade places with one of them, quit your whining, and if the roof leaks, put a bucket under it." "Oh, bun," suggested Bill, who apparently hadn't realized that the lavatory humor portion of the conversation had finished.
"A bucket," said Rawlins. "Why didn't we think of that? Oh, right, because there'd be no room left for us if we put down all the buckets we'd need."
"Sergeant,"
Thomas said. He was going to suggest that the sergeant visit the billet one day when it was raining. There didn't seem to be any other way to get across that when he said it leaked like a sieve, he wasn't exaggerating. The water came in through the cracks where the roof boards met, not in any place in particular. But before he could cram in more than that one word edgewise, Rawlins was saying, "Anyway, Barrow's just come back from the front, and he says the barn's was." It was instantly obvious that that had been precisely the wrong thing to say. He gave Thomas a look of absolute disgust.
"Really now? How many of your section have been killed in your billet? How often do you wake up and realize that the rock that's been digging into your arse all night is a bit of some other sod's skeleton? How much blood and rotting flesh is there in the mud you get?"
There didn't seem much point trying to explain that he'd been talking about the regimental aid post specifically, not the entire front.
"Are you finished?"
he asked Rollins.
"Thank you, Sergeant."
Rollins let Thomas tow him towards the door, but he fired off a parting shot before going through it.
"At least at the front they get to rotate back."
Once they were outside, Thomas demanded,
"What did I say about letting me do the talking? He wasn't taking us seriously. I noticed." He ducked under the eaves of the next building over and lit a cigarette. "You don't get a bloke like that to take you seriously by talking down to him. If he'd paid any attention to what you were saying, he'd have realized it wasn't a bloody joke. And why would he pay any more attention to us than he does to every other bugger else who doesn't like his billet?" Thomas asked. "Because you went to fucking grammar school?"
He recognized dimly that it was a low shot. Rollins never made anything of the fact that he'd had more education than most of them.
"I never said that. You didn't have to. You sound like a fucking ponce. Injurious to our health," he mimicked. "Christ." "So do you," Rollins said. "You sound like more of a fucking ponce than I ever could." "Only when I choose to,"
Thomas said, and he said it like a fucking ponce. Belatedly, he realized that what he was doing right now was a lot closer to being an absolute tit than it was to keeping his head down. Looking away from Rollins, he fished his cigarettes back out of his pocket and angled the packet in Rollins' direction. After a moment, Rollins took one. Once he'd lit it, Thomas said, "Somebody like that, you got to show him you're a regular bloke, right?" Rollins made a sound of vague agreement, and Thomas continued, "He gets enough of the high and mighty routine from officers, and he can't give them any back chat. We come in, and it's his turn to kick downwards. You've just got to stand there and take it. Once he gets it out of his system, then maybe you have a chance to get somewhere."
"Oh," said Rollins. "It probably wouldn't have worked with him anyway," Thomas added. "Time for plan B."
Rollins glanced at him.
"I wasn't serious about the mutiny."
"No," Thomas agreed, setting out toward the dressing station.
"But he's not going to help us out of the goodness of his heart."
Rollins considered.
"Bribery?" "Already looked into that," Thomas answered. "We don't have anything he wants, so that leaves blackmail."
Rollins nodded slowly.
"With what?" "That's what we have to figure out. His weakness is women. Maybe he's led a respectable local girl astray.
There were a few of those still around, living in what was left of the village.
Or maybe he has the pox and we tell him it's his choice whether we turn him in or treat him off the books. Or..."
Thomas couldn't think of another example.
"Anything like that. How do we find out?" "Tell everybody to keep their ears open. Try to talk to the transport blokes, the ambulance drivers, the mechanics, whoever we can run into. Doesn't seem like there's much of a chance of running into someone who knows this incriminating secret, whatever it is," Rollins pointed out. "No, but we find out who his mates are, what estaminets he goes to. Then we can keep an eye on him, watch for him to put a foot wrong, or get his mates drunk and pump them for information. If we don't turn up anything we can use, we get him drunk and point him at an estiminate girl we know has a pox." "I don't know," said Rollins. "Seems a bit dodgy." "Of course it's a bit dodgy. It's blackmail. Have you got any better ideas?" "No," Rollins admitted. "Let's think about it a bit, yeah? Maybe there's another way. We could murder a dozen other blokes and take their billets," Thomas suggested. "All right, maybe blackmail isn't so bad."
They reported their lack of success to the others at dinner. To Thomas's surprise, nearly all of the others seemed to have expected a different outcome. They spent most of the meal slandering the billeting sergeant's name, finally settling down toward the end to talk about other strategies, most of which seemed to involve Thomas working some kind of magic spell.
"What if you talk to the War Master about it?"
Manning said.
"There's got to be something he can do."
"The War Master's talked to me all of 3 times,
Thomas said patiently, and that was only if you counted in the NCO's mess.
"It's not like we're mates."
"That's 3 more times than me," Plank pointed out. It was about then that one of the corporals showed up to tell Thomas that the ward master wanted to see him.
"See?"
said Manning.
"It's probably about something else," Thomas told him, but privately he did wonder just a bit if the ward master might have heard about their problem somehow and had some ideas.
That wasn't too likely, he decided as he crossed the courtyard to the main building. But perhaps after the wardmaster had said whatever it was he wanted, there'd be some kind of opening that Thomas could use to bring up the situation with the billet. It wasn't like he could just pop into the Wardmaster's office for a chat whenever he wanted, but if he was already there, it might be all right. So it was with cautious optimism that Thomas presented himself in front of the Wardmaster's desk. He was not, this time, offered a seat, much less a drink.
Do you want to fucking tell me? The Wardmaster said. What, I've got the fucking billeted sergeant telling me a new asshole about you and some other fucking new bloke coming into his fucking house and getting mouthy with him?
He sounded furious, and Thomas's first impulse was to simply say, Sergeant, with the understanding that the Wardmaster was not, in fact, interested in an explanation. But he'd been wrong about that both of the other times he'd been in this position. Maybe this was the opportunity he'd been looking for.
Yes, Sergeant. We're in the old barn out on Petticoat Lane, and everyone's getting a bit fed up with it, so two of us went to ask if anything could be done. And were you fucking insolent to him about it?
It wasn't me, it was the other bloke. Wasn't something you could say, so Thomas said,
Not intentionally. I don't give a fuck about your fucking intentions. You want to know what I give a fuck about?
Drat. He really was furious this time. For once in his life, Thomas should have gone with his first impulse. Bloody typical. He braced up and said,
Sergeant. That's right, said the Wardmaster. You're getting a fucking bullocking. Well spotted.
Thomas did not say that it would be considerably easier to tell if the Wardmaster didn't shout and swear regardless of whether you were getting a bollocking or not.
What I give a fuck about is that I can't go to a fucking piss-up without hearing about how one of you fuck-ups fucked up.
He slammed his hand down on the desk with enough force to make Thomas and his tin mug full of pencils jump.
Don't do this shit,
he said wearily.
Yes, Sergeant.
He hadn't actually done anything, but like he told Rollins, he still had to stand there and take it. Somehow it stung more than usual this time, though.
You... God damn it, you were supposed to fucking know better. Yes, Sergeant. Well, the fuck did you get involved then?
Did he actually want an answer this time? Probably not.
Sergeant?
The Wardmaster stared at him for a moment.
Fine. Go. Private.
Drat. Thomas about faced and left. When he was halfway out the door, the Wardmaster yelled after him.
And if you're playing that game, it's Master Sergeant, you little pissant!
Thomas closed the door quietly behind him, then slunk out of the station, taking a circuitous route designed to make it as unlikely as possible that he'd run into anyone who might try to talk to him. Outside, he kicked an innocent pebble so hard he hurt his foot. It was stupid to be bothered, really. It wasn't the first bullocking he'd had for something that hadn't been his fault, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. And he'd known all along the others were wrong when they said the Wardmaster liked him. Maybe they believe him now. He took the long way back to the barn and stopped to smoke 2 cigarettes, but he was still steaming when he got there. It didn't help at all when, as soon as he got in the door, everyone started clamoring for him to tell them what the Wardmaster had said. Thomas glared around the interior of the barn, wondering how he could sum up what had just happened. Finally, he snarled, "Fuck off!" and stormed back outside. He'd barely sat down on the big piece of rubble and lit a cigarette when, of fucking course, Rollins showed up.
I guess it didn't go well,
he said timidly.
Well fucking spotted!
Rollins gestured for him to move over on the rubble. Thomas didn't.
Do you understand that I come out here to get away from you?
Rollins laughed nervously.
Oh, because it really defeats the fucking purpose when you follow me out here. I'm just saying.
Fine, said Rollins. You know what? Fuck you too. He started back for the barn, thank Christ.
At least now nobody can think I'm responsible for you sods,
Thomas called after him. Rollins' retreating form hesitated, then reversed course.
Wait, what? I'm not a fucking Lance Corporal anymore.
He didn't know why he mentioned it. It wasn't like he cared. It wasn't even a real rank.
Fuck, said Rollins. Why?
He hesitated.
You didn't tell the Wardmaster to fuck off, did you? How stupid do you think I am? Apparently, the fucking billeting sergeant interrupted his evening to tell him about the 2 mouthy idiots he saw today, and surprise, surprise, he didn't like it. Why didn't he yell at me too? Rollins wondered. Maybe because I wasn't fucking stupid enough to mention your name. Rollins shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Alright, look, when we go in tomorrow, I'll ask to see him and I'll tell him it was my fault. Don't do me any favours. What do you want me to do then? I don't fucking care what you do, Thomas said. Rollins did some more shifting from foot to foot. Alright, I'll just go back in then. Best idea you had all day! Thomas stayed outside until they couldn't stand the cold anymore, not that going inside was actually much of an improvement. By the time he got there, everyone else had gone to bed. Since he'd come back from the front, they'd taken to sleeping in a sort of semicircular huddle around the stove, with everyone's blankets and ground sheets overlapping to create a sort of cocoon. Rollins and Perkins had left a space in Thomas's usual place between them. He briefly considered the merits of snatching back his own blankets and sleeping somewhere else. The prospect was tempting, but it would surely wake them up. Maybe wake everybody up. And then they might try to talk to him. So he took off his boots and squeezed into his spot and was a little surprised when Rollins snuggled up against his back like always. The next morning, everyone was noticeably more subdued than usual, barely even complaining about the rain and talking in low voices with occasional wary glances in Thomas's direction. The bloke whose turn it was to heat up shaving water practically scuttled away after giving Thomas his. It reminded Thomas of nothing so much as those times growing up when Dad would go on a tear about something. It didn't happen often, but even the other kids knew to keep out of his way at those times if they didn't want their heads bitten off for breathing too loud. It turned out that being the one everyone tiptoed around wasn't any more fun than doing the tiptoeing. He felt that he ought to do something, fix it somehow, but he didn't have any idea how. All he could remember Dad ever doing was sometimes saying, in a tone of brittle good humor, how nice it was to have a bit of peace and quiet for a change. He wasn't going to do that. Thomas was just finishing wrapping his panties when a familiar voice boomed, "What a fucking shithole!"
Everybody dropped what they were doing and braced up.
As you were, the wardmaster said, walking a little further into the barn and looking around with an incredulous expression. I know that you poor son's been living in this.
He hesitated as if words failed him before settling on
thing.
It was Rollins who answered.
Some of us since February, Sergeant. Christ.
He looked up at the ceiling, which was currently admitting both rain and daylight, then wandered outside. Thomas finished getting dressed, aware that everyone was looking at him and trying to pretend they weren't. If anyone had actually dared to suggest that he go and find out what the wardmaster was doing here, he'd have refused. But nobody said it, and once he'd buttoned up his greatcoat and very carefully put on his cap, he wordlessly went outside. The wardmaster was smoking a cigarette and looking up at the barn roof. With a sidelong glance at Thomas, he said, I'm not a fucking architect, son, but I think that's meant to have some fucking shingles on it. Thomas looked at the roof. He'd never thought about the reason it was so deficient at the most important job of a roof. But now that the wardmaster mentioned it, most roofs, in his experience, did have more to them than just boards. Yes, Master Sergeant, I think so too. The wardmaster sighed. You don't actually have to call me that. Yes, Sergeant, Thomas essayed. Right. He took out his cigarettes, lit a new one from the end of the old, and then angled the packet in Thomas's direction. They were a strange French kind that Thomas didn't like, but having been on the other side of that gesture just yesterday, he figured he'd better take one. Thanks, he said, and lit it. He figured that was all he was going to get, and didn't expect more. But the wardmaster, intently watching the roof as though it were about to do something interesting, cleared his throat and said, Once I thought on it a bit, I realized it had to be pretty fucking bad for you to be making a fuss about it. Thomas nodded. Did you really tell Jenkins it was worse than the fucking front? On the tentative assumption that he was not at the moment getting a mulligan, Thomas said, I didn't say it to him. If Jenkins was the billeting sergeant, which he supposed he must be,
And I was talking about our dugouts at the regimental aid post. The wardmaster snorted. Well, that's a statement of fucking fact. Yes, Sergeant. I won't ask which of those fucking idiots you took with you, the wardmaster went on. But I will say, as a fucking lance corporal, you're meant to stop your mates from doing stupid fucking shit. Not holding their coats while they do it.
He had a point. Clearly, where Thomas had gone wrong was taking Rollins with him to see the billeting sergeant. The sergeant probably wouldn't have been any more helpful, but Thomas was fairly sure he could have avoided doing anything he would have had to complain to the wardmaster about.
Yes, Sergeant. I'm not saying it's always fucking easy, mind. You get the hang of it.
Did that mean he was still a lance corporal? It seemed an important thing to be sure about, and short of waiting until the next duty roster came out, which would be for almost 2 weeks, he could only think of one way to find out.
I a lance corporal then?
Yeah, said the wardmaster, flicking ash from a cigarette.
Your bollocking was meant to be the one I didn't have to fill out any fucking forms about.
He studied the roof some more.
I said about the piss-up, yeah?
You did. So the wardmaster had come home the worse for drink, and looking for someone to tear a strip off of? That was familiar enough, but he couldn't think of a time anybody'd ever owned up to it.
Yeah, so we'll see what the fuck I could do about.
He gestured at the barn.
This.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Right, he said. I'll bugger off then and let you lads get on with it.
Thomas finished the French cigarette and then smoked one of his own to take the taste of the first one out of his mouth. It was about time for them to be heading for the station, but everybody was still in the barn. Belatedly, he realized they were probably hiding from the wardmaster. And possibly him. A little. Sighing, he went back in. Everybody was standing clustered around the stove, fully dressed and shaven, their blankets and packs stowed under the ground sheets. They all looked up at the sound of the door opening. Right, Wardmaster's gone, Thomas said. He's going to see what he can do about all this. There was a murmur of approval. Better get on, he added, before they give away our breakfast. They all set out. On days that they left at the same time, Rollins usually walked beside Thomas, chattering about this and that. He didn't today, nor did he talk to him at breakfast, or come and bother him while he was trying to do the linen chitty. Not that Thomas had ever wanted him to do any of these things. It wasn't like they were mates or anything. Still, he was a little relieved when that afternoon he was in the courtyard smoking and waiting for the linen van, and someone came out of one of the ward huts, heading straight for him. His cap was pulled low, and he had the collar of his greatcoat up, but it had to be Rollins. He'd offer him a cigarette. Yeah, it had worked before, and the wardmaster had done it. He already had the pack out when the bloke got there. And it was Yessup.
All right, lad,
he said, taking out his own cigarettes and leaning up against a patch of wall not far from the one Thomas was using. Yeah, he said. Van's late.
Typical.
They smoked in silence for a bit.
Wardmaster talked to you.
He nodded.
Good,
said Yessup. He blew out a stream of smoke and watched it for a moment.
You were teased off about that right mess in the pharmacy, the nose.
Thomas had absolutely no idea what had happened in the pharmacy because no one had talked to him all day, but he said, I figured.
Thornton, he and Sergeant Jenkins have never seen things the same way.
Yessup added, so I can imagine how happy Jenkins was to get the chance to tell him one of his own lads had stepped in the shit. I shouldn't have taken Rollins, Thomas admitted. He was too worked up about the whole thing.
If it's as bad as all that, he were right to be worked up,
Yessup said.
But that's not the path you want to take with somebody like Jenkins. Bit of a bully.
That's what I thought.
Mind if I'd known how much bad blood there was between him and Dooley, I'd not have told you to go over there.
Thomas nodded.
I understand. We had to try something.
Yessup took another drag from his cigarette.
Dooley's going to talk to a bloke he knows in the engineering corps. One of our sort, you know. Get him to do some repairs off the books like.
Thomas hadn't known that was an option.
Sounds like a good idea.
Idly, he wondered what sort Yessup meant. Working class, maybe? Or from Yorkshire? He didn't think the wardmaster was, but the way he sounded, he could come from anywhere. I'm sure all the lads will appreciate it. The linen van turned into the courtyard, and Yessup clapped Thomas on the shoulder.
Good lad. I'll let you get on with it.
After the wards came to pick up their linen and Rollins sent somebody else, Thomas began to consider that if he wanted things to go back to normal, he might have to make a bit of an effort. Thinking back to that morning, and the fact that if all the wardmaster had wanted was to see the barn, he wouldn't have had to do it at the crack of dawn the morning after a piss-up. He fixed a cup of tea and took it to the ward where Rollins was working. He found him in the sink room, up to his elbows in dirty dishes.
Brought you this, he said. Didn't see you at lunch. I was busy, Rollins said. Then, thanks.
He dried off his hands and took the tea.
Right, what had the wardmaster done next? You know I only said that short last night because I was hacked off about the other thing, right? Yeah, said Rollins. Sure, I know. I've just been busy, like I said. Just making sure.
Thomas picked up a towel and started drying some of the dishes.
Yes, I reckons the billeting sergeant was looking for something to complain about because he and the wardmaster don't get on. Yeah?
Rollins looked interested.
Well, that makes sense. Billeting sergeant's an arse. Yeah, Thomas agreed. And it turns out he didn't mean it about me not being Lance Corporal anymore. Oh! Got it! He gave Thomas a sidelong look. Long as you don't mind being responsible for us.
Thomas supposed he had that coming.
Reckon I could live with it.
They washed dishes for a few moments.
Did you hear what's been going on in pharmacy stores? No, said Thomas. What happened? Turns out some of the chaps down there have been selling medicine on the black market. Mostly morphine. Fuck, said Thomas. No wonder the wardmaster was in a bit of a strop. Oh, Rollins said. Right. Guess you caught the edges of it, yeah? Yeah, I reckon it was damn decent of him to come and look in on us earlier. Rollins nodded. Scared the piss out of me, though. Too right, said Thomas.
Rollins must have told the others that Thomas had finished being a short-tempered sod, because by dinner time they were all speaking to him again, mostly pointless speculation about what the wardmaster was going to do about the billet, and what was going to happen to the poor sods from pharmacy, but it was less irritating than usual. And after dinner, he finally finished writing his letter to Anna.